in Iceland. President Obama goes to Wall Street Thursday to lay out what the White House is calling the rules of the road for new financial regulations. But that is just half of the battle in getting a bill passed in the Senate. Senior White House correspondent Major Garrett tonight looks at the two-tiered approach the administration is using to get more people into the tent.
In meetings with Congress or in fundraising speeches, President Obama calls for a new sheriff on Wall Street.
When we've got a situation where people are allowed to take wild risks and all the downsides are socialized, even as the profits are privatized, then something's going to have to change.
And at the White House's behest, the Democratic National Committee has cut this new TV ad.
Now Republicans are working with Wall Street lobbyists to block reform.
But even before there's a new sheriff, there's already a good cop, Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner, and a sort of bad cop, Mr. Obama. The president used his Saturday radio address, a typically partisanship-free environment, to rhetorically rough up the Senate Republican leader, Mitch McConnell.
The leader of the Senate Republicans and the chair of the Republican Senate Campaign Committee met with 24 top Wall Street executives to talk about how to block progress on this issue.
McConnell took note and reminded the White House it opposes a $50 billion liquidation fund Democrats are pushing but may well jettison.
The president criticized me in his weekly radio address, even as his deputies worked to strip the very provision I had called into question a few days before. Well, they can't have it both ways.
Meanwhile, Geithner works the Hill, meeting with Republicans on a near constant basis. Bipartisan negotiations restarted today amid Geithner predictions of an imminent breakthrough. Geithner knows the Wall Street influence story cuts both ways. Take Goldman Sachs, the powerhouse firm now accused by the Securities and Exchange Commission of fraud. Geithner's chief of staff, Mark Patterson, was a Goldman lobbyist until the spring of 2008. Is the White House nervous?
I don't know what the degree to which that what the SEC alleges any of those people. I think the SEC was pretty clear in naming in that suit who was involved.
This Sunday, White House Chief of Staff Rahm Emanuel attended a New York dinner party with top Wall Street figures, including Goldman Managing Director and Obama fundraiser David Heller. And the latest wrinkle in all this, former White House counsel Greg Craig has agreed to defend Goldman against the Securities and Exchange Commission, an awkward situation on which the White House refuses to comment. Lastly, candidate Obama accepted more than $990,000 from Goldman employees or family members, making Goldman the second largest institutional donor to his White House campaign. And Goldman is pouring money into this midterm election cycle, $700,000 so far, 70% of it received by Democrats. Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid has received $4,900 from Goldman. He refused to answer a reporter's question today as to whether he would give that donation back. Of the top 10 recipients of Goldman cash so far this election cycle, 8 are Democrats. Bret?
That's a story that we'll likely hear more of. Major thanks. There are some questions about the timing of the SEC's announcement of its action against Goldman Sachs. Fox Business Network correspondent Peter Barnes is here with that part of the story. Good evening, Peter.
Well, good evening, Bret. That's right. Well, there's some lawmakers and financial industry officials raising new questions about the timing of the administration's lawsuit against Goldman Sachs. As you recall, on Friday, the Securities and Exchange Commission charged Goldman with fraud in the sale of $2 billion in securities. Investors lost $1 billion on that deal. But overshadowed by the headlines on Goldman was a damning report about the SEC released on Friday, just hours after the agency filed suit against Goldman. It was from the agency's Inspector General on the SEC's botched investigation into Robert Allen Stanford. After more than a decade of examinations, the SEC last year finally charged Stanford with running a Ponzi scheme that cost investors $8 billion, 8 times more in losses than in the Goldman case. Now some lawmakers want to know if the SEC filed suit against Goldman on Friday in part to bury the IG's critical report on the Stanford case, which it got on March 31st.
We will be looking into the question of why did the SEC file during the day and on the same day as a scathing IG report comes out that very much says the SEC is not doing their job, but rather going after exactly things like Goldman Sachs.
SEC Chairman Mary Shapiro said Friday that the agency has adopted many changes and reforms to catch future Stanfords, and Bret, the agency denies it played with the timing of the report's release, saying it took several weeks to review, edit, and redact it.
You get fired up over these stories.
Oh, I love these stories. Yes, I get fired up. This is an amazing one.
Wow.
And a lot at stake for taxpayers.
We'll follow it. Thanks, Peter. Stocks were up today. The Dow gained 25. The S&P 500 rose 9 2/3. The Nasdaq finished ahead 20 1/5. Do you think you have the right to a vacation and to have someone else pay for it? We'll talk about that in the grapevine. Up next, is this a form of protected speech? Those are pit bulls. The Supreme Court weighs in.
We get reports of wild credit, man, just out of control. Oh, those 400s, they're the worst. We give their owners back their scores, and they'd be all like, I didn't know my credit was bad. So I say to them, it's freecreditscore.com. They can monitor their credit, protect against identity theft, get monthly score updates. Oh, there's one. Got a 519 requesting backup. If more folks went to freecreditscore.com, I wouldn't have to do this.
Offer applies with enrollment in Triple Advantage.
Tomorrow, more fraud, more waste, more abuse. Have changes by Obama.